We've been discussing the implications of the Henry and Brown research study on basic fact instruction, and that research study is cited in the Common Core references. Clearly, the implications of that study raise some serious questions about the efficacy of using flashcards, practice worksheets, and timed tests. In this lesson, we'll be exploring a possible approach that emphasizes strategy development over rote practice. Both approaches have the same end goal, which is fast and accurate fact retrieval. But the strategy development approach has not only been found to be more successful, it has the added benefit of supporting number sense and addressing several of the mathematical standards of practice, such as reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, and also looking for and making use of structure. We're supporting students in being able to look at a fact and say, this particular number combination lends itself to this strategy. The strategies foster their quantitative reasoning, and they're based on number relationships. Now, I'm going to articulate in this presentation a specific approach that you could use that incorporates the games, number talks, and reinforcement strategies from the previous lesson, but which also builds assessment into the instructional cycle. There are other assessment techniques that you can use besides the ones that I mentioned here, but this should give you an idea of how it can play out when strategy development is the focus. In actual assessment practice, there's going to be several obvious differences in our approach to fact fluency as compared to some of the methods that have been more traditionally used. If you've been accustomed to daily fact tests, you'll notice that much of the time that was previously spent on timed tests and flashcards has been replaced with instructional opportunities or reinforcement tasks. The assessments are actually fewer, but they're more targeted. Traditionally, we see students practicing all of the facts over and over and over, or alternatively practicing them just by the value of one addend. Today we're going to practice the +5 facts, or tomorrow we'll practice the +7 facts. Now we're chunking the facts, but we are chunking them with great intentionality, not just based on one addend, but based on the type of strategy or mental thought processes that you can use to be successful. Just because I know 5 plus 3 doesn't help me at all with 5 plus 8. But if I group the targeted facts for a particular strategy, then my mind can be really reinforcing that strategy over and over as I look at facts that allow for that particular practice to occur. So the reinforcement activities then will be designed to foster specific arithmetic strategies. The assessments at the beginning of the year need to answer specific questions. At the beginning of the year, we have a lot of questions about our students because we don't know them as well. And so we want to really find out whether they're ready for the tasks that we have in mind, whether they need specific interventions, and where we should focus our attention for the most productive growth. And we have these particular questions that we want to know. Do they have their anchor facts down? We expect that they do after first grade, but do they? Do they know their doubles? Do they know their sums of 10? And can they do counting on by 1 and 2? Those are things that we would like to know. Do they have mastery of everything that they're supposed to have mastery of up to this point? Do they have mastery of their facts up to 5, which was a kindergarten goal? Do they have their mastery for facts that sum up to 10, which was a first grade goal? We need to have a grip on how that's coming. So we want to know that. Plus, they will have practiced. They will have used the other facts, even those that weren't designated for mastery in first grade. So we might want to get a feel for what facts are already in their schema as well as which ones aren't. So we need to do a series of pre-assessments. That doesn't mean that they have to be hugely time-consuming or that we have to do them daily, but we need to get some pre-assessment data. So I have a series of 3 pre-assessments, and they could be done 1 per week or just periodically, 1 every few days, so that you can begin to gather that data. I'm suggesting 3 different pre-assessments, but they shouldn't take very long. The first pre-assessment elicits information about the extent to which children have readily available retrieval of their anchor facts. Now, if the anchor facts take a child a long time to process, then realistically they're not going to use them to derive facts. And the reason for this has to do with cognitive load. If you have a two-step process and the first step requires a high cognitive load, then the second step should be low cognitive load. But if they struggle to come up with an anchor fact, and that's high cognitive load, then they're going to likely conk out and not even try the deriving fact, which is an even higher cognitive load. So we need to make sure that their anchor facts are really, really available to them from a retrieval perspective, that it doesn't take them a long time. If they know their anchor facts very well, then they will have the mental attention available for us to work with them on beginning to derive new facts. We definitely need to know how they're doing with that. The actual pre-assessment 1 is in the teaching resources section of this lesson, and I encourage you to take a look at that. If you want to pause the presentation now and look at it, you can, or you can look at it later. Pre-assessment 2 is to determine whether they have mastery of their first grade facts. And we want to know whether there are particular first grade facts that quite a few students in the class are struggling with. That will be important. We can fold that into some number talks. We also want to know what individual profiles there are and how much difficulty individual children are having and with what kinds of facts. When I say what kinds of facts, I'm not just meaning, say, +3 facts or +4 facts. I want to know whether they are able to solve problems where the first addend is a lot smaller than the second addend. For example, 2 plus 7, if they're counting, do they count up from the 2? That's going to be very error prone under a time pressure. Or is there any difference at all between 2 plus 7 and 7 plus 2? If they know the commutative property well and are using it, then there may be no difference there. So I have some questions in mind that I want to try to get a grip on using the pre-assessment. Now, the pre-assessments that are available in the teaching resources are designed to help you make some fairly quick judgments. Certainly, if you spent more time looking at each individual child's assessment, you could come up with even more information. But my thought is that you should get some global data first about how prevalent certain problems are, and then you can take just the students who struggle the most and hone in with their papers and try to find out some more specifics about the nature of the struggles they're experiencing. The third pre-assessment task provides some baseline data on the remaining facts, which are designated for mastery in second grade. And it allows you not only to see which facts the children already know, but it gives you an idea which derived fact would probably be the most beneficial for them given their current knowledge base. That's the way the pre-assessment is set up, is to help you see that. I tend to start teaching with instruction the doubles plus 1 strategy. Because the doubles facts are often learned first and they tend to be a kind of comfort zone for many of the children. So often it's easier to get them to derive facts first from that set of anchor facts. Now, the doubles plus 1 is not as versatile in how it can be applied as the sums of 10. So my primary reason for emphasizing it first is just to get them used to the idea of how to derive a fact. The sums of 10 will be a big emphasis for the class further on. Because all of these strategies that we're talking about were supposed to have been introduced in first grade under the Common Core standards, they should already have some background knowledge about how to do this. It could very well be, and this is something for you to look out for, that they are already using these strategies, but they're still slow with them. So you might find that if you give the pre-assessment 3 twice, one time with a longer period of time for them to think and then another time fast, you can get a feel for whether they're able to use strategies but they're not very fast at it, or whether they do equally poorly on both. So those are some kinds of questions that I would have you do as you think through that. One of the ways that we do more time is I often use like a slow mental count. You'll see when you look at the pre-assessments that the children are not allowed to look at the fact for longer than you post it. So they don't have the facts on their paper. They just have an answer sheet. You hold the facts up. And that allows a limited time for and you can control how much time they actually get to see a particular fact and gives you a better read on individual fact knowledge. Whereas if you give them all the facts on a sheet of paper, they may have some that they never even looked at because they ran out of time. They may have some that they spent a lot of time on. It's hard to get a read on where they're spending their time. So we do it this way so we can control the amount of time. And I just actually use slow mental counts. So if I want to give them quite a bit of time, might go 1,000 to 1,000, like up to 8. But I call that a slow mental count, and I do it silently. Whereas if I want them to be fairly quick, I'll only go up to say 1,000 and see how that works. All of the assessment data that we're going to do primarily tends to be in clusters where we have facts clustered according to what strategy they're using. Eventually, we will fold these into random practice where the facts will be all mixed up with what kind of strategy. We're not going to do that for quite a while because we really want to make sure that the students are very skilled at applying the strategies and they know for what kinds of facts those strategies work before we fold it into a random practice. So we're going to focus now on some derived facts, instruction, and again, we're going to do that based on what the students' needs are. And so I'm assuming that you will find by far the vast majority of your students do not need any instruction on count on +1, +2. By second grade, that should be pretty familiar, but you could find a student here or there who might need some intervention in that area. Chunking all of the facts into sets based on the particular strategy that you're using is a wise practice technique, as we mentioned. And then later on, when it's more solidified, you can fold them in. So when you work on doubles +1 and that becomes more solidified through some practice opportunity, then you can give them a mixed practice assessment thing where they have some count on +1, +2s mixed up with the doubles +1s and -1s and see what they do with that information. The sums of 10 and make 10 tend to be a little bit more versatile, so that's definitely where you'd like to spend the bulk of your time as soon as that becomes available, where students are starting to derive facts and know how it works. And again, once one of those sets becomes familiar and students use it well, then you'll fold in some doubles facts in there as well. The really big difference between what I'm talking about, well, one of the big differences between this approach as approach to traditional methods of fluency work is that the bulk of the time dedicated to fact fluency is actually instructional time as opposed to testing. Instead of time testing. The approach here is that the more you weigh the pig, it doesn't get any fatter. Feeding the pig is what makes the pig fatter. A funny little metaphor, but what we want to do is feed the students. We want to give them some sustenance that helps the strategies grow as opposed to just testing them over and over. A general instructional approach to fact fluency then is to target a particular derived fact for a sequence for a period of time of approximately 3 weeks. Then you gather some assessment data about to what extent they've shown growth and whether you want to stick with that for longer or whether they're ready to move on to another particular strategy. Now I say 3 weeks, but keep in mind this isn't 3 weeks of your math lessons. That would be really a huge portion of your math curriculum. Basically, fact fluency shouldn't take very much of your math lesson time. We talked about number talks, and number talks are actually 5 to 10 minute tools. They can be at the start of a math lesson. Very often teachers use them at the beginning of their day as part of their morning meeting time. And there's also some games that children can play a couple times a week for 15 to 20 minutes. That can be during an intervention block, like RTI, or it can be during exploratory centers time. If there's indoor recess due to inclement weather, any of those can be good game time. for students, or they can even be games that they go home and play with parents as well for homework. So that's another option. I do suggest, however, that if you have a practice worksheet with very specific instructions for how they should be, a particular strategy they should be using, that's probably not the best opportunity for them to do a take-home assignment unless they have it pretty solid. In other words, when this fact is still kind of new and fragile, I'm not going to send that home. And the reason I'm not going to send it home is because I probably don't have time to train the parents, and they don't have time either. And so what happens is the kid goes home, they don't know what to do because it's still fragile. They try to explain it to the parents. It makes no sense. The parents get frustrated. They wonder what kind of crazy math you're doing at school these days. Not so good. So I wouldn't try to get students to practice new, unfamiliar strategies at home. Get them familiar at school first before they go home with an assignment. So even though you have at least 3 weeks dedicated to this fact fluency approach, a particular strategy, it's not going to take an enormous amount of your instructional time. The visual representations get folded into the normal tasks that you're doing for math anyway. When students show strong evidence of growth in the use of the strategy, then you can begin to fold in random facts along with the new strategy. For example, as I mentioned, after students get really comfortable with the doubles plus one, you can fold in some of those kindergarten and first grade facts that are really familiar to the class and mix it up and see what they do with that. I like to do a variety of formative assessments. Again, they're all going to be focused on our target strategy. They're not random formative assessments. And so I'm going to give them a set of cards related to that particular strategy, and they can go through it quickly and sort it into facts I know fast, facts that I know but I'm kind of slow, I have to really work at it, and facts that I don't know. And so, and they can even record this on a little sheet and set some goals for themselves about what, say, 2 facts I'm really going to work hard on here in the next little period of time. And that self-monitoring is also a good metacognitive strategy for students. Another formative assessment idea is to place the students into assessment pairs. They'll take turns assessing one another. Now, the full directions for this task, which is called How Fast is Fast, are in the Teaching Resources section. But a quick overview is that essentially they will hold up a fact for their partner and silently begin counting 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. You have to train and model this process with them. Depending on which number they are, where they are in their count, when the correct sum is given, will determine where they put the fact, where they're going to sort it, based on what number they were counting in their head when the child gave the sum. And then once they get through the whole pile, this one here that you see modeled appears to be near tens. So doubles plus, not doubles, sums of 10 plus or minus 1. And once they get that off the deck of cards finished for that set of cards, then there's a recording sheet also in the Teaching Resources section where they can record their data, and then they switch roles. During the stage of instruction where you're trying to actively foster and reinforce a particular strategy, you would say that most of the instructional and reinforcement experience is cued, as in the students really kind of know what strategy you're working on right now, what they're supposed to be practicing and trying, what they're talking about with their partners. And then as you move into the summative phase, you want to start folding those facts for the new strategy into assessments which also incorporate those previously learned and familiar facts that don't use the strategy. Now that's going to increase the difficulty, and we really want them to retain using that strategy even in a mixed practice setting. One of the ways to build a bridge to help them see that you still expect them to do that is to give them a little metacognitive preparation task. So you can give them a sample of one of these assessments, and the first time you're not going to collect data, but essentially you give it to them and you say, don't give me the sums yet, okay? Don't answer any of these questions. I just want you to go through and circle every item. Now you're showing them the facts. Circle every fact where you could use this new strategy that we've been working with. And so that forces them to actually make decisions as they look at each one. Could I use it here? Could I use it here? Could I use it here? And then say, okay, now quickly go through and do your sums. Once they've done that a couple of times, you decide when they're ready, then you can give them a cold assessment where you can collect data that actually determines to what extent they did that. They used the strategies when they were folded in with other facts. Instead of doing a solve all these facts in 1 minute, that's kind of an arbitrary goal in the first place. I prefer to go with a beat your best time approach. So they record the time. They do know that they're being timed, but their goal is to do better than they did the previous time. So that generally allows them to feel less pressure because they know that they're just competing with themselves rather than with other people. When we would love to just say, okay, well, that'll be the end of it. We gave the summative assessment. Whoa, cool, 100% mastery. That would be great, but we live in the real world, not in fantasy land, and the more realistic finding is that children will be improving in some areas, but that there's still a few pesky facts to master. These can become the focus of number talks. They can also be the good group fodder for brainstorming. I like the students who are struggling to hear a variety of ways that they could approach that pesky fact, and then to make a decision about this approach seems like it would work best for me, and then have them write as a goal and then draw a visual picture or a model of how they would think about it if they were going to use that strategy. And then I have them sign that, and they send it home, and the parents look at it and talk with them about it and sign it as well. And we set up a collaborative goal for how they can think about that fact to help them build mastery. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our 3-lesson sequence focusing on fluency with single-digit sums. And we see that the overall approach toward fact fluency has moved from general and rote fact practice in the past to now targeted and strategic practice. Instead of repeating the same kinds of tasks over and over and over across the school year, we're now more focused on particular strategies and how they can be developed and reinforced. Instead of sending the children the message that they're just to know these facts without thinking, you don't have time to think. Rather, we tell them, use your number sense, develop great strategies. Once you have those great strategies, now we're going to work at it until they get faster. Now, eventually, they will just be able to know the fact without thinking, but they're going to arrive